All right, everyone, welcome back to Cheddar's Closing Bell. The Boeing 737 MAX is now clear for takeoff, but that does not mean that flyers can immediately get on board. And along with the fallout from 2 deadly plane crashes involving that jet, the company is also dealing with a plunging demand for travel during the coronavirus pandemic. Joining us now, Andrew Tangel, reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and Michele Schneider, partner and director of trading research and education for Market Gauge. My special thanks to both of you for taking the time for a really important conversation, especially as Americans still very much remember these startling headlines that the company has been through in recent years. So, Andrew, let me begin with you here, my friend. What needs to happen before the MAX can begin carrying passengers once again?
Well, in the U.S., it's not likely to fly in a widespread way until next year. The airlines in the U.S. have to ensure that their fleet of planes that they had prior to the grounding are ready to go, and they've got to train all of their pilots. They've got to put the pilots in simulators for sessions that replicate the accident scenarios and go through a bunch of new emergency checklists that they've got to know before they can get behind the controls. So it's going to take some time. American Airlines is going to be apparently the first to reintroduce the MAX into its schedules, starting with a couple of flights a day on December 29th. But Southwest, the largest Boeing customer, or 737 customer, which is an all 737 airline, isn't going to reintroduce the MAX until April at the earliest, because they want to train all of their pilots.
And Michele, obviously, the safety and security for everyone and all passengers are incredibly important. These 2 deadly crashes took 346 lives. I'm curious from your perspective, that aside, just purely on the investor standpoint, what do you think investors in the stock are going to be looking for in the months and years ahead, and any other observations you have through the lens of investor sentiment as it pertains to Boeing at this moment?
Well, what's interesting about Boeing is that it made a really nice double bottom going back to the low it had in September and then the low it had in June at around 142. And so it was starting to scoop up from there. And then you had that nice gap up after the vaccine news in November. And so that was sort of a head start to where the technicals really kind of almost always precede the fundamentals, and then the fundamentals come in and support the move up. And now what we have here is a situation where we have tremendous amount of overhead resistance. The last swing high was up at 234. Today's high was at 223, and we've come down. So from a technical standpoint, what I'd be watching for right now is the 210 level to hold. And if we can get a weekly close over 210, I would consider that positive. If not, I'd be looking for a move closer to around 180, and then we can revisit. Of course, it's going to be affected by everything right now. New York City schools just closed down. The pandemic is obviously real. The vaccine, kind of like what Andrew was saying about flying the plane, is going to take a while for things to really sort out and get delivered. So Boeing is not completely out of the woods, as well as probably the stock market after making new highs, with some reality coming in today.
Andrew, I want to go back over to you, and I do want to play sound from FAA Administrator Steve Dickson. He voiced his support for the return to the MAX. Let's quickly play that sound, and I'll ask you a question about it on the other side.
Flew the aircraft for about 2 hours to evaluate its handling qualities and the functionality of the flight control system. Now, based on all the activities that we've undertaken during the past 20 months and my personal experience flying the aircraft, I can tell you now that I am 100% comfortable with my family flying on it.
Andrew, it's one thing for the FAA administrator to make that claim like that. It's another thing altogether for average consumers to feel comfortable once again returning to the skies in this capacity. What more needs to happen, you think, for that level of comfort among American travelers?
Well, Boeing executives have said for a while, and airline executives too, over the last couple of years, that it's really going to come down to the pilots who are at the controls to vouch for the safety of the aircraft. They are the people who are in charge of the plane. They are in charge of the safety of all the crew and passengers. And ultimately, it's going to be the pilots that passengers will have to trust and whose word they'll have to take. It's hard to imagine people getting on a plane wondering if it's safe just because some DC appointee has said it's safe, or a company executive has said it's safe. But it's the pilot's word that people in the industry think that customers are really going to have to take.
And now, Michele, with a specific eye here towards the future and a planned return, what should investors most closely be keeping their eyes on moving forward?
Well, I just want to make one point to Andrews, because I was reading Twitter comments today after the Boeing news came out, and you can really get a good gauge of public sentiment as people make comments. And there were comments of a lot of skepticism there. So yes, I agree, pilots would have to really give it a guarantee. And a lot of even pilots were tweeting this morning that they'd want to see the service bulletins before they would get on. So I just wanted to make that point. A great way to see public sentiment is by looking at comments through Twitter, which I do often. Now, in terms of investors, as I mentioned before, with the whole market right now having made new highs in the Dow, by the way, people were taking out their 30,000 in the Dow hats today in anticipation of what happened with Boeing, which is a big component of the Dow. We have seen reversals happen at the bottom, and we've seen reversals happen at a top. And so what's going to really be, I think, going forward this week for the whole market and Boeing as well, is whether or not we can get a new stimulus package. There was news of that today. Whether or not we can actually keep the COVID deaths at bay, even though shutdowns are happening. People have sort of discounted that. And with Boeing itself, like I said, I'm watching this 210 level, which is trading under right now, very carefully. And then I would possibly say that if everything stabilizes, that might be a good launch point to see if we can get up to around 280.
A conversation that focuses on the safety component as well as the investor component. My special thanks to both of you for taking the time. Andrew Tangel, reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and Michele Schneider, partner and director of trading research and education for Market Gauge. My special thanks to you both.